So I want to tell you a story this morning, and for this story, we're going to go back to 2010. All right, so in 2010, this was a year before I was married, and I spent most of my time hanging out with the same group of friends. Most of us grew up with each other. We'd known each other for a long time, and we spent most of our time together. And one of the things we really liked to do was we'd like to make bets on things. Now, we didn't really have any money, so it's not like we bet anything significant. But we just kind of throw around little bets here and there. For example, every year we'd watch the Super Bowl together, and during the Super Bowl, there'd just be constant bets flying around left and right. And one that we did every year was we'd always bet on what the first commercial would be after the kickoff. Right? That's a pretty common one. And that's one that we still do to this day. With whoever I'm watching it with, I'll make sure to make that bet with somebody. And if you're wondering, this year the winning answer would have been Hyundai. Clearly nobody won. I mean, I didn't even know Hyundai was still a company. But anyway, so that's what we did, is we like to make bets with each other. And so back to 2010, it was right around this time of year, a little bit earlier in the year, and it was right about the time that the Stanley Cup, the NHL hockey playoffs, were getting ready to start. And now I know if you're a Hurricanes fan, I apologize. This is sore material here. I'm sorry. But I'm from Michigan. It's where I lived at the time, and so we were all really big hockey fans. So we decided to make a bet on the playoffs, and what we decided to do was we said we'd all take a team, and a team that we thought would go all the way, and the first two teams to get knocked out, the losers would have to get that team's logo tattooed on them. Stupid, yes. So we stupidly agreed to it. And so then it came down to choosing what team you would pick, because obviously you want to pick a team that you think would win, that would go all the way. But on the flip side, you didn't want to pick a team that if they happened to lose, that you'd regret it for the rest of your life. Like more so than you're going to regret it regardless. So after careful consideration, I decided to go with the Vancouver Canucks. They're a team I always liked. They're pretty good that year. And long story short, as I'm sure you can figure, or else there wouldn't even be a story for me to tell, the Canucks get knocked out in the first round, not even close, and so I lose. And so I lost. I did what I said I would do, and so to this day, I have a Canucks logo tattooed right here on the inside of my arm, which is why I wore long sleeves today, so you can't see it. But that's that. I lost. I got my tattoo. End of story. So you're probably thinking one of two things. You're either thinking, Brian, what in the world does this have to do with anything? Why are you telling us this? Or you're thinking, okay, this makes sense. This is going to be a message on regret. Well, to that, I would say this is not a message on regret, and I am offended that you would think that. I don't regret my Canucks tattoo for a second. I think it's sweet. No, you might remember at the beginning of the story, I said the bet was the first two people to get knocked out had to get the tattoo. So I get knocked out. I get my tattoo like a man, and then my buddy gets knocked out next. He bet on the San Jose Sharks, and here we are 9 years later, no shark tattoo. No shark tattoo. Yeah, I had the same reaction. I was mad. I mean, I was sitting there thinking, I scarred my body. Like, I permanently disfigured myself. I made a decision that I got to explain to my kids and my grandkids why I did this stupid thing, and then you just back out? No, not cool. I was mad. So we're not talking about regret today. Today we're talking about holding a grudge, because clearly I have not gotten over this. But in reality, actually, I wasn't really mad at all. I actually kind of like my Canucks tattoo, but I wanted to make him feel bad about it. I couldn't let him feel good about his decision. But that's kind of what we're talking about today. We're talking about grudges, and we're talking about when we're presented with an opportunity to hold a grudge, if we can respond in a way that is to hold that grudge, or if there's maybe another way we can respond. Well, if I haven't met you before, my name's Brian. I'm on staff here at New City. Today we're finishing up our series that we've called Life Over Death, and what we've been doing in the series is we've taken the bottom line or the main point from Easter Sunday, and we've sort of stretched it out over the past 4 weeks and looking at how we can apply it to different areas in our life. And that main point, that point from Easter was this. It was that Jesus didn't come to make bad people good, but he came to make dead people live. So we've been looking at that statement and seeing how we can apply it in different areas of our life. So we started off by looking at how we can experience freedom over fear. And then we looked at how we can show love over lust. Then last week, Dylan talked about the idea of progress over perfection. And today we're going to talk about this idea of grace over grudges. And so for us to talk about this, I think we need to talk about what a grudge even is. Because a grudge isn't just being mad at somebody, right? A grudge isn't just some anger. But a grudge is something that kind of digs down deep inside of you. It's something that burns inside of you, that whenever you see the subject of your grudge, it kind of hurts a little bit. But the funny thing is that it hurts you so much more than the subject of your grudge. You know, for example, you might be sitting here today thinking, you might have this thought going through your head of, where I am in life, I kind of thought life would have gone a different way. You know, you might be sitting here thinking, I really thought at this point in my life I would have been married by now. Or maybe you are married and you're thinking, I really thought my marriage would have looked a little different. Or maybe I thought I would have had kids by now, or I thought I would be more successful than I am. But then when we see these people that have these lives that not just that we want, but that we thought we would have, you start to feel this bitterness towards them and this resentment that they did nothing against you. They did nothing wrong. And most of the times they don't even know that you have this feeling. But yet you have this feeling inside of you that every time they come in the room, you just get this little bit of pain and this little burning inside of you. Or maybe you're sitting here and someone actually did do something to you. That you've held on to this grudge for your entire life because someone actually did do something wrong to you. And the thing about it is they may know they hurt you or they may not, but they probably don't know that they hurt you so bad that you've harbored over it for your entire life and that you've been dealing with this on a day in and day out basis. And so this is what I want us to realize this morning. This is the first point I want us to see. And there's going to be a statement that will come up on the screen, and you're going to see it, and you're going to think, well, no kidding. It's something that we all know. It's something that we tell our kids, something we know to be true. But when it happens to us, then we're blindsided by it. And that's this. It's that life is not fair. Life's not fair, no kidding. I know life's not fair, but when life's not fair to us, then we act surprised by it, and we act like we didn't see it coming. But if we're being honest, life's not fair in a number of different ways. Life's not fair, for example, geographically. Life's not fair geographically. Like I mentioned, I'm from Michigan, and I remember getting to this time of year, and it's middle of May, almost June, and just having this thought go through my head of, when will winter be done? No, it's not really that bad. But I remember thinking, like, in the middle of spring, it's supposed to be nice out, and it's cold, and it's raining, and it's gray. And we had family that lived in North Carolina, and I remember thinking, they're lucky. It's not fair. They get to experience this nice weather, or we got to deal with this. But now I've been in North Carolina for a few years, and this thing happens in spring where it looks nice, and you think it's going to be beautiful, and then you step outside, and your face is enveloped with this yellow cloud of pollen. And if you're an allergy person like myself, now I'm sitting here thinking, at least in Michigan, I could deal with the cold. At least I could breathe. Down here, I can't even breathe for 3 or 4 months out of the year. I mean, this is worse. I wish I was dead compared to this. So, life's not fair. But if we're being honest, we all know life's not fair geographically for people in far worse conditions. There are people that are born in scenarios that we would look at from an outsider's perspective and think, man, they don't even have a chance. They don't have a chance in life because of where they're at. See, life's not fair. Life's not fair physically. You may not believe this, but there was a time where I had a head of beautiful long hair. I appreciate you laughing. That's actually not a joke. I had hair literally down to here at one point. There was a time where to preach to you, I would have had to get up here and do one of these first. That's right. But here I am. I'm 30, nothing. My dad is in his 60s, still has hair. Me and my brother, nothing. Life's not fair. Life's not fair relationally. You may be sitting here and you're in the middle of a relationship, whether it's a marriage or you have a significant other, and you're experiencing abuse, whether that be abuse physically or emotionally. And you're sitting here thinking, I didn't see any of the classic warning signs that people always tell you about. I didn't see these red flags, and now I'm in the middle of this relationship, and I don't even know how we got here. And I don't even know how to get out. This isn't fair. I don't think I did anything to deserve this. Or maybe you dealt with that same sort of abuse, but from a parent. And the person that you were supposed to be able to trust more than anyone in the world let you down and abused you in this way that you've spent your entire life just thinking about, man, I was just a kid. That's not fair. I know I didn't do anything to deserve it. It's not fair. And my wife and I were foster parents, and the most recent boy we had in our home, I remember him one day, he was crying to us, and all he kept saying is, this isn't fair. He kept saying, it's not fair. It's not fair that I'm in foster care. I didn't do anything wrong. I remember the two of us just looking at each other and looking at him, and all we could come up with to say is, you're right. Like, it's not fair. I don't even know what to say. Life's not fair. So this morning we're going to look at an example of how unfair life can be. But more than that, not just how unfair life can be, but when it's unfair to us, how we can respond. How we can either respond by holding a grudge and by holding on to anger, or if there's a way that we could possibly respond gracefully. So if you would open your Bibles this morning, we're going to be in the book of Genesis. It's the first book of the Bible if you're unfamiliar. If you don't have a Bible with you, there's a black one in one of the seat backs in front of you, and the page number of that black one is on the screen. And hey, if you don't own a Bible at home, please feel free to take that black one home. It's our gift to you today. But we're going to be looking at this story in Genesis, and it's a story that if you grew up in church, you've probably heard before, especially as a younger kid. But we're going to hopefully look at it through a little bit of a different lens. We're going to be looking at the story of a guy named Joseph. And the story of Joseph is kind of long, so we're going to just kind of sort of touch on the beginning of it and then just touch on the end of it and sort of see what we can glean from it. But up until this point, kind of right before where we kick off here, Joseph was just given this coat by his father. It's this coat or this robe, this colorful robe. It's the kind of thing he's most famous for. And what it did is it signified his father's favoritism towards him. So long story short, he was the 11th of 12 brothers. His 11 brothers all hated him. They all hated him. They were jealous of him. He was the favorite, and none of them liked him. And so where we pick up in verse 18, his father had sent him out to go to his brothers, to go get his brothers. So he's coming up to them in the distance, and they see him coming over the hill, and they're talking amongst themselves. And this is what they say in verse 18. It says, they being the brothers, saw Joseph in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. That's it. They plotted to kill him. See, I'm the youngest of 4. I have 2 older sisters and an older brother. And there's this stereotype or whatever that the youngest has it the easiest. And mom and dad go easy on the youngest. But I would argue that's not true. I think there were times in my life that my siblings hated me. They hated me. I had a later curfew. I had all these things, so I know they hated me at times. But I don't think they ever literally plotted my death. Hopefully. But that's where we are here. His brothers, they saw him coming. They plotted to kill him. They said to one another, oh, look, here comes the dream expert. And what they're referring to here is Joseph had a few dreams that he interpreted for his family. And in one of those dreams, he dreamt that the sun and the moon and 11 stars all bowed to him. Now, if you kind of think about this, 11 stars, there's 11 brothers. I don't know. If I was Joseph, and this had happened to me, waking up that morning would have been like Christmas morning, especially as the youngest. I imagine I would shoot up out of bed. I would run downstairs. I'd be sitting at the breakfast table with all of my siblings and my mom and dad, and I'd just be sitting there like, somebody asked me how I slept. Somebody asked me about my night. Come on. I imagine my mom asked, how'd you sleep? And I would just be like, well, let me tell you, I had this dream. And in this dream, 11 stars all bowed to me. Now, I'm no dream expert, but 11 stars, there's 11 of you. I think God's saying you're all going to bow to me one day. Now, hopefully, I think Joseph probably had a little more tact than that, but that's you can kind of see why his siblings started to dislike him a little bit. So in verse 20, they say, so now come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal ate him, and then we'll see what comes of his dreams. So in Reuben, the oldest brother, when Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. He said, let's not take his life. Reuben said to them, don't shed blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him, intending to rescue him from them and return him to his father. So we got one level-headed brother saying, don't kill him, let's just throw him in a pit, but he's secretly planning to come back and rescue him. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the colorful robe his father gave him, and they took him and threw him into the pit, and the pit was empty without water. So they sat down to eat a meal. And that's my favorite sentence of this entire thing, is that they take their brother, they beat him up, they throw him in this pit, and then they sit down, and they just look around. I imagine they're standing on the edge of the pit, just kind of looking down, and like, well, are you guys hungry? What do we do next? And so they sat down to eat a meal. And when they looked up, when they looked up, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying aromatic gum, balsam, and resin, going down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, another brother, he said to his brothers, what do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? So he's saying, yeah, Joseph will be gone, but I feel like we should get a little something out of this. Let's figure out a way to get something out of this. And the brothers agreed. So when the Midianite traders passed by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites who took Joseph to Egypt. And if we keep reading, we see that then they took his robe that they took from him and ripped it up and dipped it in goat's blood and then took it back to their father and said, looks like Joseph got eaten by an animal, sorry. And this is what I think we need to know this morning, what we need to kind of learn from this passage, and that's this. It's that grudges will infect every area of your life. Grudges will infect every area of your life. They won't just affect your life, but they'll infect, they'll seep down, they'll dig in, they'll infect every area of your life. See, here's the thing. We don't have a ton of backstory of Joseph and his brothers here, but I imagine their grudge towards him started off most likely like most of ours do. Most likely they started off being mad at him, being annoyed by him, being annoyed that he was the favorite. But then they didn't address it, and they let it continue to build, and they probably fed off one another. And eventually their unaddressed grudge went from probably just being mad or being angry all the way to literal murder. All the way to literal murder of their own brother, and then deciding to not murder him, but just to do the humane thing and sell him as a slave. See, that's how far their grudge took them. I love this quote by an author. Her name is Anne Lamott. She says, "Not forgiving is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die." And I think we can see that in our own lives. We hold on to these grudges, and if we look at it from an outsider's perspective, we can see it hurts us, and it gives us more pain than the subject of our grudge, than the person or the subject that wronged us. But hearing that statement, you may think back to the story we just read and say, that actually doesn't line up. I don't think that lines up. Joseph was sold as a slave. Like, sure, his brothers got to experience some guilt probably, but it affected Joseph way more than it affected them. And what I'd say to that is, at this point in the story, that seems to be true, at least physically. But I would say spiritually, I don't think that's true. And I think if we look to the First Testament in 1 John, you don't have to turn there, it'll be up on the screen, we can kind of see why. It says this in 1 John 4:20. It says, "If anyone says, 'I love God,' yet hates his brother or sister, he's a liar. For the person who does not love his brother or sister whom he has seen can't love God who he has not seen. And we have this command from him, the one who loves God must also love his brother and sister." See, if I'm being honest, this is a verse, these two verses are verses that I've spent most of my life trying to contradict. And what I mean by that is I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up going to church, went to a Christian school. I was surrounded by Christianity. And at any point in my life, at most points in my life, if you would have asked me, I would have said, yeah, I love God. But if I believe these verses to be true, then that statement would be a lie. Because I spent most of my young life, even into my young adult life, filled with anger, filled with bitterness, filled with hatred, not towards a specific person or situation, but just towards kind of everybody. I lived my life in a way that if somebody wronged me, or if someone not even wronged me, but did something I didn't like, I would just hold on to this resentment towards them and this bitterness towards them, to where I got to a point in my life where I kind of resigned myself to the fact. I just said, you know what, I don't think I'm going to like people. I kind of going to live my life in a way that I'm just going to kind of hate everybody. And this is something I've made an effort to change in my life, but I can vouch firsthand that grudges and resentment won't just affect you, but they'll seep down, they'll infect every area of your life. So why do we need to know this morning? And I think this is the reason that we need to know this. It's because grudges will destroy you. Grudges will destroy you. Not can, not may, not they might hurt you, but grudges will inevitably destroy you. And if we look back to Genesis, we're going to turn a little bit to the end of Joseph's story. So we're going to turn a few pages over to chapter 50, and we're going to kind of see how this plays out and how this works out for them. So what happens in between where we read and where we're picking up is Joseph was sold as a slave into Egypt. He actually ends up getting imprisoned at one point, but God has grace on him, and he's able to actually rise in power a little bit because he interprets some dreams, and he predicts that this famine is coming. And because he predicts this famine is coming, he's the one who's put in charge of gathering and storing all the food for the coming famine. So once the famine hits, he's the one in charge of who gets what food, how much food people get. And so in effect, he's in charge of who lives and who dies. So he becomes this incredibly powerful person throughout the entire world because everyone has to come to him for food. And so right before we pick up in verse 15, Jacob, Joseph's father, has just passed away. And so this is what happens right after their father passes away. It says, when Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead, they said to one another, if Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he'll certainly repay us for the suffering we caused him. So they're thinking, we did this terrible thing to Joseph, and I'm sure he hasn't gotten back at us yet because Dad's been here. I'm sure he just didn't want to go against what Dad would want, and so now that Dad's gone, he's going to get back at us. And so they came up with this plan that I think is hilarious. So they sent this message to Joseph, and the message said, before he died, your father gave this command. So basically what they're saying is, Dad passed away, and then we were going through his stuff, and we found this note. And this note on it said, to Joseph. I know the note looks like my handwriting, but it was Dad, all right? So I'll just read it for you. This is what Dad says to you. He says, say this to Joseph. Please forgive your brother's transgressions and their sin, the suffering they caused you. So therefore, please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God of your father. So they're basically saying, hey, Dad passed away, and we looking through stuff, we found this note, and in the note, Dad said you have to forgive us. So you kind of have to forgive us because Dad's dead. And so you kind of have to do what he says. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't believe for a second that their dad, that Jacob actually wrote this letter. But this was his response. It says Joseph wept when the message came to him. In verse 18, it says, his brothers also came to him, bowed before him, and said, we are your slaves. So this was how far their grudge took them. It took them so far that they knew they couldn't just apologize, but that they had to manufacture this letter from their father and then offer themselves as literal slaves to him because they thought that that was the only way that he would have mercy on them. In verse 19, it says, but Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me, but God planned it for good to bring about this present result, the survival of many people. Therefore, don't be afraid. I'll take care of you and your children. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So what do we need to do with all this morning? And I think what we need to do with this is something that it seems so simple, but it's so difficult to do in reality. And that's this. We need to show grace. We need to show grace. It's as simple as that, but it's so hard to do in reality. But see, Joseph's brothers came to him hoping for forgiveness at best, but they were shown grace. See, if the story went a little differently, if his brothers came to him and Joseph said to them, you know what, it's fine. Get up, don't bow before me. It's okay. I forgive you, but I don't think it'd be healthy for us to have a relationship. So yes, I forgive you. You go your way, I'll go my way. Let's not have any contact, but I've moved on. It's fine. Now just go. If that's all he had done, this would still be an incredible story. Joseph would still be doing something that most of us would have such a hard time doing. But he didn't do that. He didn't just stop at forgiveness, but he took it a step further and showed grace. He didn't just say, I'll forgive you, but he took it a step further and said, no, I'll take care of you. I'll take care of your kids. I'll take care of your family. I'll feed you. See, they were hoping for forgiveness, but they were shown grace. See, about 5 years ago, my wife and I, we lived in Michigan at the time, we took in a family member, a younger family member who was kind of falling on some hard times. He was 17 at the time, and he... long story short, he had just run into a rough crowd, and his life wasn't really going down a great path, and he had some trouble at home, and so he needed a place to stay. So we told him he'd come stay with us, and he ended up living with us for 2 years. And it was good for the most part. We helped him get his license, we helped him get a job, and for the most part, it was good. I remember one night, he was out, we let him borrow one of our cars and go out, and we get a call at night from his brother, from his older brother, saying, hey, I just wanted to let you know, he's over here, and he actually just got in a car accident. And he said, everybody's fine, no one's hurt, the car's pretty damaged, but it can still be driven. But the details don't really matter, but long story short, it was his fault. So I remember asking him, I was like, why are you calling? Why isn't he calling us? And he said, well, to be honest, he's afraid to call. He didn't want you to know. I said, okay, it's fine, just tell him to come home, we'll deal with it when he gets home. And so I remember my wife, Brittany, and I, we're sitting there waiting for him to come home, and all these thoughts are going through our head. We're trying to process what's going on. We're thinking, like, we give you this place to stay. We give you a house. We feed you. We let you borrow a car. And then this is how you repay us. Like, we're 25 at the time. We don't have much money. We can't afford to fix this car. And so all these thoughts are going through our head. And then he came home, and we're ready to jump down his throat. And he comes home, and he walks in crying. So I remember we kind of decided to go a different route. When he came home, we gave him a hug. We said, you know what, it's fine. It's just a car. It's not a big deal. We're just glad you're okay. That's the important thing. And the rest we'll figure out, but don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And I remember him crying to us after that. And I share that story for 2 reasons. The first off is I think that night was a turning point in our relationship. I think that night was a time where he saw that we would show grace to him. And not in a way that he could get away with whatever he wanted. But I think that moment he saw that we recognize that he's not perfect. See, I think he was coming home expecting to get what he deserved. And what he deserved, honestly, was to be punished, maybe us take the car away, maybe even us kick him out, I don't know. But he was shown grace. And the second reason I share that story is not to say, look at how great we did. It's not to say, we showed grace, why can't you show grace? Or look at all these times we got it right. No, like I mentioned before, I could point to 100 times in my life where I got this wrong. I could point to years and years of my life where I lived just holding grudges and holding bitterness and not letting anything go and being angry at everybody. So I share this story to say, it doesn't matter how many times you got this wrong. What matters is what we do with it today. It doesn't matter how many times you've held on to a grudge. It doesn't matter how long you've held on to this grudge that it just feels like you can't let go. It doesn't matter what happened before. What matters is what we do today. And today, I think we need to show grace. See, no matter how we feel in the moment, we need to show grace. Forgiveness is great. Don't get me wrong. I could point to a bunch of Bible verses that say we need to forgive. Forgiveness is a good thing. But I think God's asking us to take it a step further, not just forgive, but take it a step further and show grace. So why do we need to do that this morning? Why is it important for us to show grace? And this is why. It's because we've been shown the ultimate grace. We've been shown the ultimate grace. See, I don't want to downplay the idea of grudges here. I don't want to come across as if I'm saying, hey, if you're holding a grudge, just let it go. It's no big deal. It's that easy. Just let it go, because I know it's not that easy. So you may be sitting here thinking, hey, this all sounds great, but I've been so wronged. I've held on to this grudge. I can't even think about showing grace at this point. I can't think about showing grace. I can't even think about forgiving, because ultimately, I don't believe they deserve to be forgiven. And if you're thinking that at this point, I want this to be super clear. If you're thinking that you've been wronged and the person that wronged you doesn't deserve to be forgiven, I want to be clear when I say this. You're right. You're right. They don't deserve to be forgiven. But ultimately, neither do we. Ultimately, neither do we. We don't deserve to be forgiven either. Whether you've been in church for a long time, or you're new to this whole thing, or you're not even really sure what we're talking about, we all know we're broken people. We all know we're messed up. We all know we mess things up on a daily basis. But God has given the ultimate grace. He said, it doesn't matter how many times you mess up, I have grace on you, and I'll give you life. See, it says in the New Testament, it says in Ephesians 2:18, it says, for you're saved by grace through faith. It's not from yourselves, but it's God's gift. See, we're saved not because of what we do. God offers salvation not because we become this perfect person or because we become better people, but he offers grace. He offers salvation just that, because of grace. He offers love because of grace. And that brings us to our bottom line this morning. And this is the main thing I think we need to take away this morning, and that's this. It's that grace doesn't make us good. It makes us alive. See, grace doesn't make us good. Grace doesn't make us magically a better person. God's grace isn't just to make us magically better, but grace gives us literal life. See, God's grace doesn't mean that he will love you when. It doesn't mean he will love you when you get your life together, or once you get past your addiction, or once you fix your marriage. Grace means God loves you, period. That God loves you, end of sentence. That's it. No ifs, no whens. See, our circumstances and our situations don't dictate God's love towards us, but grace does. See, I think it's so easy for us to think that God will have grace on us once we get past whatever we're dealing with. You know, I don't know about you, but I've thought this so many times that I'm dealing with this sin issue, or I'm dealing with this issue in my life, and once I get past it, then I can look back on it and say, God, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and then he'll have grace. But when we're in the middle of it, when we're dealing with this on a day in and day out basis, when we're entrenched in this issue, we don't feel like God can have grace in that scenario. We don't feel like God can show grace when we're messing it up on a day in and day out basis. But in reality, God is sitting there saying, no, I have grace on you. I had grace yesterday. I have grace today. I know you think you're past this issue, but I know you're going to mess it up next week, and I'm going to have grace then. See, God has grace, not dependent on our circumstances. It's dependent totally on God's grace. See, life isn't fair. Like we talked about at the beginning, life is not fair, but ultimately neither is God's grace. God's grace isn't fair, and if we're being honest, we don't want fair. We don't want fair in our lives because fair isn't grace. What we want is we want God to have grace on us. We want this life, and that's not fair. But life's not fair, but neither is God's grace. And this is the gospel. It's that we did nothing to deserve life, that we mess up on a daily basis, that we are constantly, not to sound too harsh, but that we let God down with what we do with our lives, and that we mess things up. But that he's sitting there not saying, oh, you let me down again, but he's sitting there saying, no, it's okay. I have grace. My grace is unconditional. My grace continues. My grace is not dependent on what you do. See, I don't know if you've ever thought this before, but God sent his son. God sent his literal son, Jesus, to this earth to die an actual death for you and I. And I don't know if you've ever thought this before, but I've had these thoughts in my life where I said, God, I've read this. I know what you say in the Bible. I know you sent your son. I know you said you have unconditional grace. I know you said that you forgive. But when you said all these things, I don't think you knew I was coming. I don't think you knew how much I would mess things up. I don't think you knew how much I would let you down. And if you did, I don't think you would have said that. But the fact of the matter is, he doesn't make mistakes. He's not sitting up in heaven saying, oh, man, he did it again. He's sitting up there saying, no, I sent my son knowing about you back then. I knew about you before you were born. I knew what would happen. But he still sent his son anyways. He sent his son because of the grace that he has on us. See, grace doesn't make us good, but it makes us alive. It doesn't make us good, but it gives us life. So for those of us, if you've accepted God's grace, if you've recognized his grace and accepted it into your life, I think it's our responsibility to show that grace to others. I don't think we can accept God's grace into our lives and then still live a life of bitterness and hatred towards people and live a life holding on to these grudges. I think it's our responsibility to look at stories like Joseph's and look at Jesus and look at God sending his son and see the grace that he has and not give the exact same grace to other people, because ultimately that's not possible. We're not God. But I think it's our responsibility that if we recognize this grace that God has on us, it's our responsibility to show that to others. And when we're presented with opportunities or situations that it'd be easy to hold a grudge against, that we remember these things and remember that God's grace didn't make us good, but it makes us alive. It gives us life. Will you pray with me this morning?